Christ who emptied himself for us, give us today the gift of humility, so that we would realize a true thankfulness for things we too often take for granted. That we would remember and thank you today for these most precious gifts, for life, for breath, for shelter, for the meal that we had and all meals, and for a span of days in which to live and to choose what use we would make of our time. Give us grace to make wise investment of the days you have given us this week, that by our thoughts and our words and actions we might love you well. And as we pause at the cresting of this week, guide us, O Spirit of God, in a brief and sober reflection on our daily stewards and habits. Search now our willing hearts. Now, Holy Spirit, who for love of your children offers both conviction and comfort, give encouragement and tender correction to each of us as we have need. Towards the end, that our life and breath and span of days would not be squandered, but would be well spent in your service. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Alrighty. Good evening. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about mission and policy. So this is where things get a little more nuts and bolts in this conversation. It's a little less talking about just the general framework of poverty alleviation and digging in more to some of the practical aspects. And specifically tonight, it's about putting pen to paper and saying, here's how we want to try to address poverty alleviation in our community. So, this week's entitled Built for Transformation. We are building our ability to do transformation, both our own transformation and the transformation of our community better. So let's talk a little bit about it. So why do you think written policy, specifically written policy, might be important for this type of work?
Consistency.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. She said consistency, if anyone didn't hear that. Anybody else?
Less room for misunderstanding or misinterpretation or miscommunication.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Defining boundaries.
I think in almost any case where you have a group of people trying to address a situation, it's a whole lot easier to all be somewhat on the same page if you have things written on paper. Many people who were involved with the winter shelter or have even just heard a lot about winter shelter knows I'm a stickler, and it wasn't just me, Cherie was too when it was her time to be in charge. This church is known for being sticklers about the rules for winter shelter. The other churches may be on a spectrum of kind of more loosey-goosey with some of the rules, which is fair enough. That comes from a place of like just having grace and being patient and all that, and that's fine. But we tend to have a reputation for being the strict ones. And we have rules written very explicitly, and we've even adjusted wording of those rules this year because we find somebody coming in and going, the rule says this, and we're like, okay, let me write it differently then. Somebody looking for a loophole. But we found that our guests seem to actually, and the feedback we got from people we're still in contact with from the winter shelter, have expressed how much they enjoyed being at our shelter, specifically at Cedar Lane, and part of that was because we were strict. Yes, that makes some things difficult, but because those boundaries are so well kept, it's a lot easier for people to kind of feel safe. They know we're taking care of them, that we stick to those rules because we believe it's safer to do so. And so in the end, it makes it a lot easier in moments where things start to get a little hairy. Somebody's getting emotional or something, a kind of crisis type situation comes up. It's a whole lot easier to handle that with a cool head there's already written policy right here. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do because we've already talked about it and it's in paper. I don't have to make that decision. We already made it ahead of time with cool heads. And that's kind of the situation here. It's very emotional. When we're working with people who are going through hard times, your emotions get involved, and they should. But by having written policy, it's a lot easier for us to make some wise decisions. Now, do you think we always stick to the letter of that policy 100% of the time? No, we don't. There's room for grace, of course, and sometimes we find places where we go, okay, this is the rule, but in this situation, I think we can bend this rule a little bit. But by having that framework, it keeps things a lot neater and a lot nicer. And there have been times in our church's history where there was not as specific policy in place when it came to benevolence. And there was a lot of, even in recent years, there was like a policy, Monday morning had their policy, but then maybe the staff wasn't participating in that policy. And so it was like, I think we've talked about this before, somebody could come in on Monday and go and not be eligible for assistance, and then they go, okay, I'll just come back on Tuesday and talk to the preacher, talk to so-and-so, and they'll give me the assistance I'm looking for. So it was much harder for us to have kind of a streamlined approach to how do we do this well, without all of us being somewhat on the same page. And even now, this class is partially an attempt to bring you all in to that conversation, let you know a little bit about what our policy is, which is actually our benevolence policy. We do have a written policy, and it's currently being updated. I'll share a little bit with you from what was written a few years ago, but it already needs updates because things are constantly changing. It's not meant to be a concrete piece of law. It's supposed to be constantly changing, constantly growing to meet the needs of the community. It's an ongoing conversation. Any questions, thoughts about that? So in general, do you think policy, written policy, is something that Cedar Lane does well? Don't know?
Don't know.
Don't know? Okay, we got a few I don't knows.
No idea. Do you
Maybe
mean
in places.
any area or
In
just-
any area, yeah, just, are we good at going, let's put pen to paper, let's put some policy on paper? I hear a yes, okay?
It used to be,
Used to be,
it
okay,
used to be a lot better,
okay.
and it's still okay now in some areas. But the little drawback is people following it.
Yes, agreed.
New people that come and aren't aware, like the written, I don't know how many of you know, there is a written policy about the use of the building. And it was very detailed when we built this
Right.
new building. And I don't know what shelf that is on now, but that's just an example of there's something was in place, and like Linda said, it just kind of, when new people come and aren't aware of it, and it gets lost.
So that's a good point. Yes, Melissa?
Well, there's a policy and procedures manual that has undergone several updates, and the latest update is woefully outdated and needs to be updated. It has started to be updated, and then people leave, something happens, and it really needs to be updated.
Okay.
But yeah, there's lots of changes, and it just gets put on the back burner,
Okay.
and that's just all I'll say about it.
Yeah. And I think,
I have what I'm supposed to do,
yeah,
but
okay. That's good insight. Yeah, Brianne?
I'm just curious, are the policies accessible for anyone, and where do you find them? Are they on our website, or do you go to the office, or?
You'd probably request them from the office. I think pretty much any of our policies are fair game. There's
Yeah.
not a whole lot of information in this church, with the exception of like private family matters that have been shared with just elders or staff or something. As far as like policy and documentation, financial matter, a lot of that is sort of fair game if it's requested. Because we're a church family and everybody's involved, it's everybody's information shared. So yes, that would be available to you. But you guys are making a good point. Some of our stuff is not super current. Part of that is probably due a little bit to COVID. COVID definitely hurt some of our like teams and committees that met on a semi-regular basis. Some of that didn't necessarily start up again post-COVID. We also have lost quite a few members from our church. They've moved on to other congregations. And so like you said, sometimes it's like, who was the keeper of that thing? And you don't realize it until that person has left or moved on or passed away. And then you go, oh, that's the person who's doing that thing. And now it's just not getting done. We need to reassign that. And that's the tricky part about having a family of about 200 people is everybody's doing little pieces of work and not everyone knows what everyone else is doing, right? So that's another reason that it's nice to have things on paper and try to make sure we're keeping that conversation going and making people aware of what our policies are. I will say, despite the fact that yes, maybe some things need some updating, I will tell you, since I've started this job and am now interacting far more with other like church leaders and administrators, I'm very aware Cedar Lane may be actually exceptionally good at putting pen to paper. I think, we were probably not the only ones in Tullahoma that have a large number of like engineers and engineering type sciencey people and businessy people we are, I would argue, spectacular, at least relatively, at forming a committee and putting things on paper. We don't always, as you said, communicate it well or make sure that everybody's kind of adhering to the policies. That's sometimes the tricky part, is actually the follow through on it. But yeah, I do think Cedar Lane overall is pretty good at the policy side of things, but that's the trick. There are some churches that are far more loosey-goosey. There's not a whole lot of pen to paper on anything. There's not a whole lot of policy. It's sort of a lot of just random yeses and nos when it comes to benevolence. Like, I'll help today because I moved that way and tomorrow maybe not, It's a lot harder to have any real consistency or a long-term plan for people if we're kind of just doing, not that this is a bad thing, but random good deeds. Helping sometimes and not, just depending on how the wind moves us. So that's why we're trying to get us all on the same page when it comes to benevolence. And other matters. If you feel strongly about policy in other areas, talk to someone, make it happen. If you think it hasn't been updated, look into it. Okay, so when it comes to our benevolence philosophy or our mission statement, that's kind of a simple, relatively simple statement that just says our why. Why do we do this work? Why is this important? I will read to you what our current mission statement, and I don't know if this is actually current, the 2022, y'all think there's a more updated one, right? Well anyways, the Clarks are currently wonderful people that they are working on updating this policy, but I'll read you what I found in my file cabinet. I don't know what the most current one is. So the mission: to engage in benevolence within the body of Christ at Cedar Lane and our surrounding community in effective and beneficial ways. We recognize that poverty comes in many forms, and with limited resources, we must be good stewards to find the best ways to help those in need. Yeah, it sounds pretty good to me. I don't have any big notes there. Now, it could be adjusted, it could be, but when it comes to, one of the things the Chalmers course specifically emphasized was not spending too much time. It's easy, and I will say again, this is something our church is exceptional at. We love to like parse and think on the word and like, ooh, but I don't know if that wording is just quite right, and that's good. We want to be mindful about our words, but we also don't want to overthink it, right? We need to get something on paper that captures the spirit of what we're trying to do, and I think that one is lovely. Whether it's adjusted or not, that pretty much covers what I think we're going for here, right? Okay. So, the point of that mission statement, or any mission statement, is to focus our purpose. Sorry, I did not angle this where I can see the big one today. What are we trying to accomplish? So we're looking at what is the problem that we're trying to address, and in this case, it's specifically like our first week. What is poverty? How are we addressing poverty? What is the goal? Are we trying to solve poverty? Whatever that means, I don't know that that's it. And how will we try to achieve our goal? Those are the things we're trying to look at to focus our purpose. What is our reason for doing this work? These were example key principles in the book under how will we try to achieve our goal. Because to me, I read that, like, how will we try to achieve our goal? And I thought, that sounds like a little more policy. That's more of the practical side of things. It seems like it doesn't belong here under mission. But their key principles that they offered up as examples made a little more sense to me. It's still a little more broad, okay? They have 3 principles here. Because human beings are relational beings, we will seek to provide material assistance in the context of long-term empowering relationships. So that's 1. Number 2, because Jesus Christ is the ultimate solution to poverty, we will seek to enfold people as full participants into his body. Number 3, because the goal is restoration to image bearing, we will use approaches that build on people's own gifts, resources, and abilities. So I really liked those. Again, still kind of in that missional mindset, where we're just kind of looking at the broad picture. What is the reason and what is the how, okay? So now we get into the policy, and that is the more of the nuts and bolts, the how do we do this work. We're trying to focus our ministry, okay? Whom will we help? So how do we prioritize the people who are seeking help? Do we have a special opportunity with a specific target group? There are some churches, some church ministries that may only be targeting like single mothers, or some that are only targeting veterans might be an option. You know, they're targeting very specific groups. We all have, to some extent, limited resources, right? We only have what we have, and they find that they have a body who can help this population well, who can work with this population well, and they just focus everything they have on that. I don't see a problem with that, especially if we can spread that around, where this church is working with this group and this church is working, you know, if everybody's found their niche, hopefully everybody gets what they need. We also have to focus our resources. So what type of help will we give? We have to consider our budget, right? How much goes to members, right? We have, in our budget, we have things that are member benevolence. If there's someone who is a part of our body needs help, that's a budget, that's a piece of the budget. And then there's the outreach, the general benevolence, right? And even then, kind of divvying up that budget, are we looking at how much goes to relief, how much goes to rehabilitation, how much goes into development, you know, trying to divvy up those pieces, and how much money do you have to start with? All of that is relevant to how we're going to help people. Are there types of assistance we will not provide? And for us, I will say one of the big things that we typically don't do at this point is transportation. Transportation is actually a really a tricky one around here because we don't have great, or really any public transportation. We have SCATs. It does cost a little money, and you usually have to schedule it at least 2 days in advance. It's hard to get where you need to go that way if you don't have access to money and you have trouble with planning ahead, or you have a last minute thing. So people struggle if they don't have a working vehicle or they don't have access to gas money. A lot of people struggle to get around here, but we don't currently offer transportation. We have people call sometimes, or even people who come in on Monday mornings will get dropped off by a friend. This has happened fairly recently. Some people got dropped off by a friend or relative and then said, okay, can y'all take us home? We said no, because again, it's just not a service that we provide. It's something that's hard to get in the habit of doing because we don't have the resources to provide a transportation ministry right now. The need is far greater than what we would be able to do. And in our experience, if you do that one time, word tends to get around. and you wind up being asked to do it again and again and again. And it's harder and harder to say no if you've already made an exception. They did get a ride home, for the record, they're fine. They worked it out. We said no, and they figured it out. That's empowerment right there.
Walking's good.
Yes, walking is
Spirit,
great. People,
mind,
a lot
and
of people
time,
walk around here,
yeah.
and it's okay. I'm not saying it's ideal, but it's doable. Yeah.
As a non-profit organization, what things do you get into in this budget consideration and the stuff that you do that has liability concerns? Because when you mention travel and taking someone somewhere, I would think there'd be a liability concern with driving someone to, say, Nashville. Or I was even thinking about this when we were doing the oil change, when I saw this trail of oil outside of Stan McNabb. I was wondering, well, I hope that thing got screwed on tightly, but you know, what liability,
Yeah.
you know, were we there with fixing people's cars? You know, I don't know. Is that something that's in policy, or is that part of this discussion, I guess? Is what I'm-
Yeah, I mean, that is a relevant question when it comes to something like, now I think if a random citizen in this room were to give a person a ride in their vehicle, generally, you should be covered by your own personal insurance. But if we started something like a transportation ministry and that gets bigger, I think there would be liability concerns. We would definitely have to look into what that would mean. And for the record, I'm not suggesting we start that ministry. I'm saying that's something we don't do, and I don't necessarily think it's something we have the resources or availability to do. But it is relevant. And the oil change event is a good example, because we did have a sticky situation where someone was kind of complaining, and this was after the fact, and claimed to not know, even though we'd advertised it and repeated it and made it pretty clear, that it was volunteers changing their oil. They thought Stan McNabb was giving out free oil changes. I don't know why it would behoove them to do that, but that's what they thought they were getting, and it was kind of like, oh, that's, you know, sorry. So
They got me. Sorry.
it's a little bit, some of that does get a little sticky. It gets a little sticky. We have to be careful with that. Yes.
I know there are times though, that we will help someone out. Like she said, the lady got home, but one thing goes to what Colin said. If there is a man that is needing a ride somewhere, you know, there's a Woody or there's a Tom. If there is a woman that needs a ride somewhere, I don't want Tom taking that lady without a woman with. You know, there's just common sense things, and we do not turn every single person down. It's not in concrete, but yet kind of.
Yeah.
It's cement.
Might be more likely to make an exception on something like that when it's someone we know, someone we have a relationship with, because there are safety considerations too. I mean, let's just be honest. I don't think most people we're encountering through these ministries are dangerous people by any means. However, we do encounter some people who may be a bit desperate, and putting yourself in a position where you're alone with them is a little, and Militia knows if there are times that I'm having to meet someone off-site. I do meet people outside of the church office if they have transportation issues. That I'm choosy about, where I will meet them, and do I know them well enough to go meet them somewhere? It needs to be a public place, does it need to be private, you know? But even then, I will sometimes give Militia information about where I'm going, and we set up kind of an understanding. I will text you in 20 minutes to let you know I'm okay, and I'll text you when I'm on my way back to the building. All of that is just safety precautions. It's not because I genuinely think people I'm working with are overall dangerous. Honestly, if I had reason to believe they were dangerous people, I wouldn't be meeting with them outside of the church building, right? Yes, David.
So I found myself in a situation helping somebody and realized I was taking somebody in my vehicle somewhere and they didn't have really anything to lose.
Mm-hmm.
That's the person you gotta watch out for. I'm in the security field, and I stay away from people who have nothing to lose for personal safety reasons.
That's right.
So that's I always ask that question before I do something.
Yes, and that's a really good point. I think that's what we're wanting to remember, is that it's not that we believe we're encountering people who are just evil or something like that, but we are encountering people who may be at the end of their rope and may not have a lot of options for survival, or feel that they have no options for survival at that point. And so they might make a poor choice, and you could be at the other end of that. Now, not only is your bodily safety important, but also we have to consider like people who might be litigious or looking to, you know, go viral with a video that they think looks like they've put you in a compromising situation or a difficult situation, right? You want to just protect yourself, protect your reputation, the church's reputation. So like you said, you know, putting yourself in a vehicle alone with someone could be not an ideal situation. The way it looks, or the way that story could be told later, is not great. We don't want to put reputation above all else, but we want to be wise, right? We want to be discerning about that. And that is part of the reason for this policy. Why we want to have written policy is so that we can make those good decisions in those moments where somebody's saying, I need a ride, can you give me a ride? And they seem really desperate. It's easy to be sort of swayed by that. But if you have something written that you've already thought of ahead of time, it's a little easier to use your good judgment there.
Related to transportation, Kirby, is we do get requests for gas, and we generally do not meet that request. We will direct it to Highland Hills. Highland Hills does give,
Gas card.
I don't know what the limit is, but gas cards. But we have occasionally, people become very good at their story, and sometimes you have to sort through their story. But there are times that Woody or Gerald or Tom has gone with someone to the gas station and put
Sure.
some gas in their car for whatever errand
Yeah.
that they need. But that's occasionally, but
Yeah.
we regularly do not
Right.
help with gas.
And I would say if someone, especially if someone, this is just my little tidbit, this does not mean you have to listen to me, or I'm not your boss. No, you do what you feel called to do. But if someone has come into the church building during church hours, it is highly likely that they know there are a lot of good, God-fearing people here who may be more likely to help, okay? And that's okay. They're trying to access their resources, all right? We don't judge that. But also, if we're hearing a story that says this is an emergency, I absolutely have to have, I can't wait till tomorrow morning when Highland Hills gives away their gas cards. I have to have it right now. I just kind of go, why? And how did you get here? If, you know, you made it to a church, but it's an absolute emergency. You know, someone's dying, or there's a funeral they have to get to. Those are stories you'll hear frequently in those situations. Again, no judgment. You're just trying to survive, and these are the skills. Those stories are really good, and they are believable, and they are rarely, that's not fair. Many times they will not be true. There just, I fell for one of those stories when I was in college. I remember the first time I encountered someone who gave me just the there were tears, it was so compelling. And I was like, I don't have any cash to give you, you know, but I had a restaurant with a boyfriend at the time, and I said, we'll give you a ride to the hospital. Supposedly someone was dying in the hospital. And I was like, get in the car, we'll take you. And suddenly he wasn't interested anymore. He was like, oh, no, I'm good. And he left. So, you know, that just tells you, like, it was, and I was so jaded after that. I was like, what? That was a lie? I was so innocent to that kind of thing at that point. But for this person, his full-time job was trying to get those needs met, trying to survive, trying to get to the next thing. Now, in his case, it may very well have been trying to get to the next fix. Looking back on that situation, I think addiction was likely involved in that story. But either way, that's what his brain was telling him he needed to survive, okay? So we don't come from it from a place of like trying to condemn that, but we do want to be people who are discerning about it so that we're not enabling someone, right? So just to get back to this part, the next question was like how often and how much. This varies a little bit. Monday mornings is a little more, we have a very specific policy there. People can come, households can come 3 times per year, and they can receive a set amount, and that is in the form of help with rent, utilities, or food, right? We've talked about this. It's a little different for people who work with me directly. I work with people in a more like long-term targeted fashion. And sometimes I do assist with gas. I have gas cards that I give out to people if that's what they're currently needing more assistance with. A lot of times it's a good way for me to get people to come in. This sounds like a bribe, but it's not intended to be. It's incentive. If we're having trouble keeping appointments, it's going to be hard to keep a job, hard to get an apartment, those kinds of things that they're trying to overcome. They're struggling with that accountability, and I want to help them learn to do that. We assume, many of us who've been raised with a certain amount of privilege, we assume that, oh, I have accountability. I always show up because I'm just inherently good. No, in all likelihood, you had a family who raised you to value that, and you had opportunities to receive incentive, receive rewards by being accountable, by showing up when you say you're going to. That's a learned behavior. And so if you've not been raised in a situation where that was learned, or you've been in a situation where for a long time that has not been a part of your life, that just may not be something you're accustomed to sticking to. When I make an appointment, I'll show up. And so part of what I do is I let them know, when you show up, there is assistance coming your way. There's a small amount of relief that you can get, but you gotta come in and we need to talk. We need to talk through, where are we on job hunting? Where are we on the apartment hunt? Where are we on the, are you keeping up with your therapy appointments? That kind of thing, just helping them check in on the goals they're trying to meet, the goals they have set. And then they're able to get some assistance at the end of that appointment. And we always set the next appointment to check in again. And so anyways, that, for me, it's a little more, I know I said don't be loosey-goosey. Mine is a little more loosey-goosey. It is a little more, I have a long-term relationship with this person. Do I think they actually need a food card today? Or do I think they need to go back and check with the SNAP office and they need to follow up on, SNAP, that's food stamps, if anyone doesn't know. Do they need to check on their resources? Do they need to be showing up for work more? I'm trying to kind of discern, do they need this assistance or is this more of a rehabilitation moment, okay? So we also want to be focusing our process. So what procedures do we follow? Like, what does the intake process look like? Briefly, on Monday mornings, there is an intake process, especially if it's their first time here receiving assistance. They do fill out a form with all of their information. It tells us who they live with, do they have a job, how much do they make, where do they live, what's their rent, all that kind of stuff. They fill out that information, and it gives us the information to be able to put them into the charity check system, which is how we ensure that we're not double paying on the same bill, right? Other agencies in town, they fill out if they've met a need for someone, and we can go into the system and see, okay, they received assistance last at this location for this need. There's all sorts of details in there, okay? So that's part of the intake process. And then every time after that, they come and sign in. They show their ID and proof of address, and then Linda finds their file in the box. Their paper is there. So we have a pretty detailed intake process. Then if they move on, either from Monday morning or I meet them in other ways, and they become one of my people that I work with long term, I have a separate intake form that's just a little more detailed. It just has a little more information about what their goals are, where they'd like to be, not just where are you now, what is your immediate need, but what are your hopes and dreams, where would you like to be next year, so we can start working towards some of those things. But again, having that written intake process is really valuable, not only for documentation's sake. Sometimes I have someone call the church asking for help or come to the office or something, and I'll have some questions like, I wonder if that person's been here on Monday mornings. Well, I can go to the box and I can look through the files and see who was there. I can get on Charity Check and I can see what other assistance they've been receiving recently. All of that's really valuable to trying to discern whether it's time for us to help or if we should step back and help in a different way. I should say we should always help, but sometimes helping in a material way is not necessarily the next move. So fact checking, that goes back to the charity check situation. That's one of our major fact checking things. But we've even had people coming in telling us they're from Shepherd's House, and then we get an odd story and go, hang on, I don't think they do that at Shepherd's House. Let me call them. And we do some fact checking. It's okay to tell someone, hold on, I'll call you tomorrow. Let me get back to you about this.
Trust but verify.
Trust but verify. That's a good policy. And we have had people get upset with us for not immediately believing their story, you know, being frustrated that we wouldn't just take their word at face value. I understand that, but also we see a lot of people, we help a lot of people. We have to do some verification. Otherwise, it would be very, very easy for us to be constantly taken advantage of. And it's just part of the process. It's pretty much part of the process anywhere you go, that you're gonna have some amount of fact checking going on.
And part of that, Kirby, is the stewardship, and you mentioned that. But the people here are contributing, and we want to be good stewards of the money that the others entrust us with, that you as members entrust us with. And sometimes we just remind people we're not the government.
Yeah,
You know, we have limited resources, and
that's right.
that doesn't happen very often, but occasionally.
Yeah.
But it's just, Linda and Tom have been so good to remind us of good stewardship.
That's right. And it is important. I'm always very aware of the fact when I'm making a decision on whether or not to provide a certain amount of financial assistance to someone in my office. I'm very aware it's God's money, right? We know that. But I also know it's God's money that was sourced from all of you, everyone in this building. And so it's not, when it's me making that decision with my own wallet, it's a little easier to be like, I don't know if this was right, you know, and kind of just be flippant about it. But it feels a little different when you're aware of how many people have entrusted you with that decision, and all I can do is pray and study and try to educate myself as best I can and hope that the Holy Spirit moves me and moves Linda and Jan and anyone else engaged in these ministries to make good decisions. And we won't always get it right, and luckily there's grace for that too. But we absolutely do our best to do our due diligence and try to be good stewards with this money. There's also, when do we refer? And when do we refer to other ministries? When do we refer to other agencies in the area? Do we refer? And that's many times that comes up. We have a whole sheet of community resources that I'm currently working on updating because it's a little bit outdated. But we say, well, this church over here, like Highland Hills gives gas cards, go over there, talk to them. Or this church, Covenant, helps with car repairs, call them, you know. And we point them to other places in the area. And then sometimes we'll have someone call and say, I have a surgery coming up, you know, I need transportation to get to this urgent surgery. And I say, okay, do you have Medicaid? Because then you have MedRide. Let me give you that phone number. You need to schedule your MedRide, or have your doctor schedule it before you leave the office next time. You know, a lot of times the staff there will help them schedule those things. So we want to be conscious of what other resources are already available in the area, so that we're not providing services that, quite frankly, are unnecessary, because they have access to them. And they're not unnecessary. I'm not saying that it's not good to help, but we can focus. It's all about that focusing how we're doing our work, focusing our energy and our resources. So if that need is already able to be met in another way, we want to make sure we're just connecting them with those resources.
Kurt,
Yes,
is that little cheat sheet available?
it is. Militia actually has them in her office. There's a stack of them, like right at the bookcase when you walk in. You walk in the office, it's right there on the left. There's a little stack of those sheets. Again, they're not quite current. A lot of the information on there is, but I'm working on tweaking it. So I'll have a new
Give us
version
a
out
day.
soon.
Give us a day or two.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll update it.
Yeah, we'll get them fixed up for you. But either way, there's still some good information on there.
Hey, Kirby,
Yes.
do those people on that list just service Coffee County? Because I know we get calls from other counties.
No, we do have some things from surrounding areas, not as much. A lot of our stuff is Tullahoma and maybe Coffee or Franklin County, but we even have some information for like Shelbyville, for even as far as like Murfreesboro and Franklin, if people are needing, for instance, like addiction recovery we might be referring them outside of the immediate area. Yeah, we have some for surrounding areas. It does get a lot larger when you start to look at the bigger area, and so that list would get a whole lot longer. We mostly try to keep up with the immediate stuff. Yes.
I think it's good to point out that here at Cedar Lane, that we only have Tullahoma residents.
That's right. On Monday mornings, we only assist Tullahoma residents. That's not because we wouldn't love to help everybody who needs help, but because we kind of say, all right, churches in Manchester, y'all got to do your thing, because we've already got such a great need here. We have to focus on just our immediate area. That is really hard to do, but that's part of the reason we require a separate proof of address other than just their license, because my license isn't even on the thing. It's incorrect in the system. It's right, you know what I'm talking about? You can like update your address online, but your physical license will say something else. So that's why we require the separate proof of address to try to ensure they are current Tullahoma residents.
Yeah, and also, they don't, when they come in for help, they don't get the money, they don't get the thing for the
That's right.
bills and stuff. I send the checks to
That's right.
the utility companies, the landlords for the bills,
Yeah.
whatever needs help, that goes through me, and I send it directly to whoever.
That's right.
needs it.
Cash never changes hands. There's no cash being given out, and I would highly recommend none of you give out cash either if you can avoid it. It's just really hard to make sure it's being used the way for the need that you're trying to meet, right? And so you can buy if it's something that you want to keep around for people you see who are homeless in the area. I know someone asked, what do I do if I see someone who's homeless? Okay, well, if you really feel like you feel called to do something, to provide for them in some material way, there are food cards you can buy at Walmart or Food Lion, or I'm sure Kroger has these too, that specifically are only for groceries or like hygiene, necessities. You can't buy alcohol or tobacco or lottery tickets with them, right? And so if we're trying to make sure that it's actually meeting a need and not unintentionally serving a habit or addiction or something that's not really helpful, that's something that you can have on hand if you feel called to do so. And that's the kind of card we give out for food cards. And we don't ever even hand them the checks. We've even had a situation where we could not get the correct address for this person's landlord, and they didn't know it, and it was like weeks of trying to figure this out. And she kept saying, I'll just take it where I take my rent check. And we were like, no. We had to sort it out, but we don't hand them the checks. We always put them in the mail, or I've even hand delivered some when that's been necessary. Okay, so another question, and each church has to kind of answer this question for themselves, is will attending church or hearing about the gospel be required for assistance? At our church, we do not consider that a requirement. However, on Monday mornings, there is a devotional when they come in. Part of that is because there's actually time to fill. When they come in, they check in, they sign in, we get their information, and then Linda and Jan start putting them into the computer, checking on Charity Check to make sure we can provide that assistance today. So there's a gap in time, and during that time, they sit and enjoy a devotional. And I do say enjoy because most of them seem to genuinely enjoy it. For a lot of them, when I talk to them, a lot of the people who come here, if you're coming to a church for assistance, a lot of them have a faith background, okay? A lot of them are people of faith who wish they were still more an active part of a church family, but don't feel able, maybe they feel some shame. Maybe there's a lot to unpack there about why they're not currently a part of a church family. Some are, but a lot aren't. And so for them, it's like the most church they've gotten in a while. And so they enjoy that. Now, occasionally we have a few who might choose to sit out in the hallway. Do we go over and say, you better get in there, or you're not gonna get your help? No, we don't. We just say, are you okay? Do you need anything? It's not intended to be you listen to the gospel or you're not getting your assistance today. It's more of just an offering of if this is something that would be uplifting to you. And for many it seems to be, this is available. So I think personally, I love that that's the way things are done, so that it's not tit for tat. We don't want the gospel to be transactional, right? So how do we address outside factors contributing to someone's continued experience of poverty? Or do we? And by that, I mean things like when we have someone come in who's currently in a domestic violence situation, or let's see, someone who has a drug addiction, and that's really keeping them in that situation. Do we try to address that? What do you guys think?
Resources.
We try to help them access the resources if they're open to it. There are people who aren't interested. It all comes down to, do I want it more than you want it? Like, do you want change? Do you want to change this circumstance that's affecting you currently? Or do you just want this relief today? And for some of them, it's the latter, right? And we don't judge. If they're not ready for change, they're not ready. But in some cases, there are people who are coming in, like I know one mom came in and she was really struggling because she was in kind of a custody battle situation and feeling really frustrated about how things were shaking out in family court. So what came of that was me just talking to her about, okay, what's your lawyer situation? Do you have access to legal aid? Do you have access to, do you have what you need? Are you able to get to your court? Are you able to get to your parent training classes? Just making sure that they have what they need to keep moving forward. They might need that relief today, but they also need someone who genuinely cares. Like, even if you don't have the answers to solve what's going on with them, just being someone who actually cares about what's going on is huge. That's a huge piece. I had a family today who moved into an apartment, and it was very exciting. It came about kind of suddenly, and they wanted to go so bad. I didn't have a whole lot to do with them getting the apartment. It was their deal. I've been helping them in much smaller ways, and I say we here have been helping them in much smaller ways, doing laundry in our facilities and that kind of thing. They solved their own problem. They accessed their resources and they got into their apartment. We helped a little bit, just with some of the costs of moving, but that person, even after that transaction was done, that material assistance was provided for that move, they're still texting and they're saying, like, I want you to come see the apartment once we get all moved in, because they wanted to celebrate that with someone who was walking through that with them. It wasn't just about the money. They knew they could count on us to help, but they also knew there are people there who genuinely care that we've been in this transient situation, and having people to celebrate that milestone with them was really big. And I gotta tell y'all, it like made my week. And again, I'm not celebrating because I did anything great. I really didn't do anything. But I'm celebrating because it just feels so good to know that they're out of that situation. And you all can be a part of those kinds of relationships too. And it just, it's healing. It is just healing to walk with someone through those moments where things are good. It's hard walking through the parts that aren't good and not fixing it, not being able to just like wave your magic wand and make it all better. But it's worth it.
Hey Kirby, on
Yes.
that note, and I'm not meaning to be the second voice about risk.
Mm.
Have you come into contact with situations in which you've had to look at policy or really ask yourself what you're legally obligated to report when it comes to domestic violence and or abuse?
Mhm.
And how do you address that? Because I know that's not what you're going into. That's not your role in a relationship. But as you learn about some of these situations, have you really had to look at what is my role here,
Yeah.
and am I obligated to report something?
Absolutely. So here in Tennessee, the laws about mandated reporters are kind of interesting. We're all kind of mandated reporters. I definitely am. Certainly when I was working in mental health, I still consider myself something like a social worker. Now in this role, I consider myself a mandated reporter. That means if I were to find out about any kind of child, elder, or any kind of dependent abuse or neglect, or even strongly suspect it, I have to report that, right? And I would be happy, I will send out with this week's email just where do you go to do that? If you don't know, you could Google it, but I can send you the website that you would need to utilize if you know of a situation like that. And there are times where you may struggle with is this abuse, here's the tricky part. When we were seeing people in the shelter, we had children in the shelter for the first time this year. And I know there were quite a few of us going, okay, are they okay? Like, should we be worried? And we really struggled with that. But the fact is, guys, homelessness is not abuse or neglect in and of itself, right? It's not reportable. DCS does not automatically get involved because someone has lost stable housing, okay? And so instead, looking at, do these children appear to have loving, stable parents who are doing their best to keep them safe and clothed and fed? And as far as we could tell, they did, okay? Yeah, Sheree.
I was also gonna say, if ever in doubt, still call. They're the ones that make the decision,
That's
not
right.
us.
That's right.
And you can do it anonymously.
That's right. Yes, the reporter is always anonymous to the person who's been reported on, for the record. You can report anonymously, but also DCS is not going to tell them, like, Colin Bills told me, blah, blah, blah. That's always going to remain private. But that is relevant. Now, when it comes to domestic violence, unfortunately, that's not really, I mean, you can report it. If the person is interested in reporting it, you could help them do that. But that isn't something, there's not like a protective service for women or men, oftentimes women, but men as well, in domestic violence situations. They are autonomous adults, and it's up to them if they want to report that to someone. So there's not like a DCS for people in domestic violence situations, unfortunately, because a lot of times those people might be reluctant to report their partner. So the question then becomes, in my experience, when I've witnessed a domestic violence situation, then I'm looking at, are there kids in the household? Do I believe they are at risk because of the domestic violence, right? And that, it gets real messy there. But yeah, I think there's absolutely, we should care enough that we would be, if we're in relationship with someone and we believe someone is unsafe, we need to do our best to address that. And a lot of times that means going through the proper channels, because that is a necessity sometimes.
And it's also about being brave.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard, I mean, in my circumstance that I had, it was really hard for me to go to this person and say, what's happening to you is not okay.
Right.
And that and knowing how to approach them and the thing to say that they're not gonna immediately shut you down
Yeah.
because they want to be okay.
Yeah.
And so that's just, being brave is part of that.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Okay, so if we're focusing our message, how do we share and solidify our guidelines? This is kind of what we were addressing before. How do we share that with the church? How do we share that with you all? That's part of what this class is, at least for benevolence. We're trying to share our policy, share our thinking, get this even more streamlined than it already was. How do we share it with the community, right? That looks a little bit different. We don't share the breakdown of our policy with everyone who walks in on Monday mornings, right? And a lot of places around town may have things like Catholic Charities has like vocational programs where they're trying to encourage people to stick with a job. And so I know like if you're working with them and you get to like 3 months in a job, there is some amount of material assistance that happens at your 3-month mark, but they don't advertise how much that is, right? So there's kind of like being careful with what we tell people, so it's not like, I'll just get to 3 months, get my money, and then I'm out, right? We don't want that to be the situation, but a lot of us do try to incentivize by offering some amount of material assistance. So we're a little different with how we share with the community. However, unlike Monday mornings, they are very aware when they come in that they are eligible to come in 3 times per year per household, okay? That's made clear to them every time they come in. You're on your 2nd visit, so you'll have 1 more visit after this. This is your last visit. Just know that this is your last visit. We always remind them that this is our policy and this is how this is gonna go. Any other items you all think should be addressed in our policies that we haven't already discussed? Anything we might be missing?
So we only allow even for food vouchers 3 times a year?
That's right. We actually have a lot of food resources in our community. There are a lot of food pantries, very active food pantries, other churches and organizations that provide food cards. If you are accessing all of your resources, it would be, this is not to say people are not food insecure in our area. However, there are tons of resources if they can access them. And so that's what we're trying to do, is limit that so that we help, but then also how do we point you towards the other resources that exist? We want you to access that.
And there's one facility, it's a church that gives out meat and bread. So I've had people tell me, we come here and get the perishables like milk and use ours, and then they'll go to the other place and get what they need from the other place that
That's right.
ours doesn't necessarily
That's right.
provide.
Yes.
Kirby, hearing that there's all this networking going on, are most churches agreeable to network together? I know that you're talking about services provided by maybe some agencies also,
Yes.
but do you find that it's a cohesive thing to get information so we all know what's going on?
I would say by and large, yes.
Okay,
Our community excels at that. It's unusual. I've realized that Tullahoma is especially good at that. Churches that are willing to kind of reach across and work together, and I love it. I actually found out that the family that got into the apartment today was also being assisted with other needs from one of our other partner, and it was like, hey, the two of us working together, we assisted them until they were able to solve their problem, and that's such a good feeling to know we didn't even realize it, and we were sharing the same person, the same needs, yeah.
My mate wants to mention about the Better Together program.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before, but there may be some new faces. There's a Better Together group here in Tullahoma that meets, it's about to start up again. It meets once a month for probably 8 months out of the year or something. And we meet over at First Christian, and it's just a lot of the churches, church leaders will come, nonprofit agencies will show up. Just really anyone who's got stuff going on that they feel like the community needs to know about, things of this nature, things where we're trying to meet needs. If you need volunteers or you just want people to help you spread the word, it's a great place to go. And because of that, we've been able to streamline a lot of things and all be kind of on the same page. And it helps us, we put faces with names. It's not just that church down the street. It's like, oh, that's Steve, And so it's a little bit easier to work together and have these really great friendships, and the recognition that we may do things different on Sunday mornings, and we may have some really different theology things going on, but our mission remains very much the same. Even for some non-faith-based organizations, the mission looks very similar, and so it's like, okay, we can tackle this all together. So. Sorry I held y'all over a little bit, but this was really good discussion. I thought this was going to be like a drier week, and it really wasn't. You guys were into it. I love it. This was great. Thank you guys so much.